Games that come out at a console's launch, like the original Panzer Dragoon, are often hampered by rushed timelines and a lack of knowledge about the ins and outs of a new system. They're still very much coming to terms with what a new console means for game development. If those same developers who made those titles are given an opportunity to make a sequel with all of that knowledge that they gained, the resulting game can be vastly improved compared to the original, sometimes to a shocking degree. And that is very much the case with the game we're looking at today, Panzer Dragoon Zwei. A game that pulls out just about every single trick that the Saturn had up its sleeves, and plenty more tricks that the developers had to develop from scratch themselves. Perhaps the first thing you'll notice about Zwei, however, is that the story is way more compelling from the start, with something to be invested in, a tale of vengeance where the main character's motivations are crystal clear, instead of a broad saving the world type story without any specific character traits like the first game had. It's still pretty easy to get lost and not understand what's going on as you get more into the game, but it definitely starts out on a much more solid footing, which is a great help for getting you into the game and invested in the world. Something else you'll immediately notice about my footage here is the fact that it's actually in 16:9 widescreen. And now that's not stretched out by me in some effort to fill the screen or using some emulator hack. I'm playing natively on an original Saturn, and Panzer Dragoon Zwei actually supports anamorphic widescreen, something that was incredibly rare at the time. It would be much more common in the next generation, on the original Xbox especially, but seeing it here on the Saturn is always wild, and much like a lot of this game, very well ahead of its time. You'll also notice plenty of graphical improvements across the board, with things in general being a lot clearer and easier to distinguish, with vastly improved models for both your dragon and your enemies. There's also a few really neat graphical effects. The water in this game looks incredible for the time period, for example. All in all, this game is incredibly impressive for a Saturn game, and even puts some PlayStation games to shame, which is a massive achievement given the known limitations of its chosen platform. But the developers weren't just making straightforward improvements in technical prowess. Zwei is also much easier from the start. It seems clear that the biggest piece of feedback the developers internalized after the first game was that it was too hard, but they perhaps overcorrected and took it a little bit too far. The biggest addition to the game is definitely the save function, which is nice for being able to duck out of a run and continue it later, but it brings with it a mechanic to let you retry levels as much as you want. This does admittedly feel quite a bit more modern than its predecessor, and less like an arcade game designed to suck up your quarters, but much like home ports of arcade games with unlimited credits feel like they've lost something, Zwei feels lesser in some ways for this edition. Though I think everything else considered, this is probably for the best, both for accessibility and reducing frustration. Despite the fact that one of the things I really loved about the first game was the mastery that it required of you. The difficulty was an element of Panzer Dragoon I definitely miss in Zwei, but it more than makes up for it in other ways. Not the least of which is the way that the spectacle of it all has been ramped up so dramatically. Some of the boss fights here are truly incredible, even jaw-dropping, especially given the limitations that the devs were working with on the Saturn. The music adds to the atmosphere significantly as well, and is also fantastic. By this point, composers had really started stretching their legs with the new capabilities that the CD format gave them, and it shows here with an excellent soundtrack that goes right along with every beat in the game. One of the advantages you have when you can guarantee where the player is at all times in an on-rail shooter. But by far the greatest improvement in Zwei over its predecessor is the addition of what feels like proper 3D control pad support. Analog control just feels right with this sort of game, and the Saturn's implementation of one works quite well, despite the notable lack of games that actually make use of it on the platform, and the Saturn's general reputation as being an amazing place for playing 2D games, but lacking when it came to 3D. It does feel a bit closer to something like a circle pad instead of a full-on analog stick, but it works very well and doesn't have any issues with accuracy or anything that you'd expect with a lesser implementation of the technology. Ultimately, Zwei is a dramatic improvement on Panzer Dragoon, and finds itself among some of the best rail shooters ever made. If you've ever enjoyed a rail shooter, this game is still absolutely worth checking out. Unlike the first game, however, as of the recording of this, the only way to play this game is still the original Saturn version. Though it's certainly easy enough to emulate these days, and you could very well go that route and have a fantastic experience.